The sea
We
has
must
always
reach
carried
the
whispers,
shore.
stories that drift on waves, older than any empire.
The storm is
Tonight,
too strong.
we follow one such tale, a tale of the ocean's heart and the god who watched over it. His name is Poseidon, the Tidebringer, not as a figure of wrath, but as a keeper of balance. The ocean is endless, yet never silent. Each tide, each wave, tells a secret. Close your eyes and hear the rhythm. It is the sound of the earth breathing. Sailors once believed the sea could think. They left offerings, hoping for safe return. But the sea offered more than shelter. It offered guidance, patience, and wonder. Poseidon walked quietly through currents unseen. He carried not only storms, but calm. Not only power, but promise. Imagine the horizon at dawn, the sky mirrored in a silver sea. And somewhere within that silence, Poseidon listens. He is not gone, only hidden. His story is not of conquest, but of harmony. Tonight, we bring his legend to shore. We listen to the waves. We follow the tides, and we remember the Tidebringer. The ocean has always spoken in whispers. Its voice is not loud, but endless. Each ripple carries a memory from the deep. Long before ships cut through the waves, the sea already told stories. It spoke in foam, in tides, in the hush of the shore. People listened without knowing they were listening. Fishermen rose with dawn, and the sea answered their nets. Children played at the edge, laughing as the water teased their feet. And in their dreams, they heard voices calling from far away. This was the ocean's first language, not of words, but of rhythm. A rhythm steady as a heartbeat. And within this rhythm lived something greater. A presence, patient and unseen. The sailors called it luck. The poets called it mystery. But it was neither luck nor mystery. It was Poseidon. He watched the waters as a shepherd watches a flock. Every current was a thread in his hand. Every tide was a breath in his chest. He felt the weight of the moon drawing the waters. He felt the sigh of the wind pressing against the sea's skin. And when he closed his eyes, he heard every drop of water singing. For Poseidon, the ocean was not noise. It was a choir. He walked the currents unseen by mortal eyes. Sometimes a shadow beneath the surface. Sometimes a ripple that appeared without wind. Always present, but never fully revealed. To those who listened, he left signs. A sudden calm in the middle of a restless sea. A guiding breeze that carried a lost ship to shore. Or a shell found on the sand, whispering in his hollow heart. These were gifts, not warnings. The ocean did not threaten, it reminded. It reminded that life and water are bound together, that without one, the other cannot last. And so the first listeners began to understand. They lit fires by the shore and spoke to the waves. They believed the sea could hear, and the sea did. Poseidon heard every prayer, though he answered with silence. His silence was not absence, but presence. In the quiet, he listened. In the quiet, he guided. Some called him ruler of the deep. But he was more than ruler. He was keeper of balance. He did not take joy in storms, though storms came. He did not seek to frighten, though waves rose high. The sea was not his anger, but his voice. When calm, it spoke of peace. When restless, it spoke of change. When wild, it spoke of lessons unlearned. And the people by the shore began to feel it. They learned that tides were not chance. They were messages. They learned that currents did not wander. They followed patterns. The ocean became not only a place to fear, it became a teacher. And at the heart of that teaching was Poseidon. His presence was vast, yet gentle. He was not far away, but within every wave. The sea was his temple, and the tide his hymn. Those who listened walked away, changed. They felt smaller, yet safer. They felt humbled, yet held, for they realized the ocean was alive. And in that life, Poseidon waited, not to rule over them, but to remind them. Remind them that to walk the earth is to carry the sea inside. For the sea runs in rivers, in rain, in blood. It is part of all things. And Poseidon, the Tidebringer, carries that truth, quietly, faithfully, eternally. The ocean does not sleep, yet it dreams. Its dreams are tides, moving with the pull of the unseen. And within those dreams, Poseidon awakens. He does not rise in thunder nor in fire. He stirs like the first swell of a hidden current. The god of the sea is patient, yet aware. He feels the weight of silence pressed upon the waters. For centuries, harmony ruled between sea and shore. But now, the balance begins to shift. Ships grow larger, sails grow bolder, voices grow louder. The sea, once respected, is now challenged. Men cut through waves as if they owned them. They cast nets too wide, take more than they need. They leave behind scars of wood, smoke, and greed. Poseidon listens, but he does not judge. His gaze is deep, measuring, timeless. He knows the sea cannot be broken, only disturbed. And he feels the unrest ripple through every tide. The fish swim further, the corals dim, the winds sigh heavier. Change is upon the ocean, and Poseidon cannot ignore it. The Tidebringer awakens not in anger, but in duty. He is not a destroyer, but a guardian. His trident is not a weapon, but a key. It opens the channels of the sea's hidden strength. Currents bow when he raises it. Waves hush when he lowers it. The sea listens to him as a choir to its conductor. And yet, he is not master, but servant to its truth. For Poseidon knows he and the ocean are one. Its voice is his voice, its sorrow his sorrow. And now, that sorrow grows heavy. He walks the seafloor, each step echoing through coral halls. Creatures of the deep stir, sensing his presence. Whales turn their songs toward him. Dolphins circle with restless energy. Even the smallest shells hum softly, resonating with his thought. Poseidon speaks without words. His message is felt, not heard. The sea must be remembered, not conquered. It must be shared, not claimed. He feels the sun above, pressing heat into shallow waters. He feels the rivers bringing both life and burden. He feels the fragile line between human hands and ocean heart. For Poseidon, awakening is not to rage. It is to remind. He remembers the first fires by the shore. He remembers prayers whispered by trembling sailors. He remembers gratitude, once pure and simple. But now he feels ambition stronger than reverence. And so he stirs the tides to speak again. A gentle swell nudging a drifting boat. A sudden calm, silencing an impatient storm. A shimmering wave carrying light like a lantern. He begins with whispers, not roars. For teaching is not done by fear, but by wonder. The Tidebringer understands this truth. He does not seek to punish, but to awaken. His presence flows into every corner of the sea, from the deepest trench to the sunlit shallows, from the icy caps to the warm coral gardens. He touches all, reminding them they are one body. And above, the humans feel something stirring. They cannot see him, yet they sense him. Their sails tighten though no wind blows. Their nets return light though the sea is heavy. They pause, uncertain, humbled. Poseidon is awake. Not to claim power, but to protect balance. Not to silence humanity, but to guide them. His trident hums with the rhythm of the tides. Each vibration carries a promise. As long as the sea breathes, so will he. And as long as he breathes, the sea will endure. This is the awakening of the Tidebringer. Quiet, steady, unstoppable. The sea carries many mysteries, but none greater than the gift Poseidon holds. It is not a sword, nor a shield, nor an object of conquest. It is the Tidebringer, the trident of harmony. 3 prongs, forged not from fire, but from ocean itself. Each prong carries a secret, hidden from mortal eyes. The first holds the breath of the currents. The second holds the song of the waves. The third holds the memory of the tides. Together, they do not command, but guide. They do not strike, but steady. The Tidebringer is not a weapon of fear. It is a promise, shaped in the language of the sea. When Poseidon lifts it, the waters respond. Currents bend, storms bow, waves gather in reverence, not to serve, but to align. For the trident is not about control. It is about connection. Poseidon knows that the sea cannot be owned. It breathes, it remembers, it lives. And the Tidebringer exists to keep that life whole. There was a time when even gods forgot this truth. They reached for power, reaching beyond balance. But Poseidon remembered, and the trident reminded. It hummed when harmony was kept. It dimmed when greed prevailed. The Tidebringer became more than an object. It became conscience, echoing through, water and spirit. When sailors prayed at dawn, their voices touched its song. When whales sang deep in the dark, it resonated with them. When rivers kissed the ocean's edge, it shimmered with joy. Every element of water spoke through it. And Poseidon listened. For he did not hold the trident for himself. He held it for the sea. He held it for those who could not speak, for corals, for fish, for the drifting plankton, for clouds that rained and rivers that wept. The Tidebringer was their voice, and Poseidon was its bearer. He often walked to the edge of hidden reefs. There he would raise the trident slowly. The waters calmed, the silence thickened. Even the wind leaned close to listen. And in that stillness, Poseidon spoke. He asked the sea if it was well. He asked the currents if they were steady. He asked the tides if they were balanced. The answers came not as words, but as feelings. Sometimes the sea laughed in soft ripples. Sometimes it sighed in long, rolling waves. Sometimes it wept, pulling back in sorrowful silence. The trident absorbed it all. It carried the truth to Poseidon's heart, and he carried that truth back into the world. Humans never saw this ritual. They never knew how often Poseidon listened, but they felt its results. They felt storms pass more gently than expected. They felt winds guide them home when they were lost. They found fish returning to waters thought empty. They called it fortune,
reach the shore,
never knowing it was grace. Grace held by the Tidebringer.
The storm is too strong.
One evening, when the moon lifted high, Poseidon stood again. The trident glowed with silver light. The ocean shimmered as if painted in starlight. And in that glow, Poseidon smiled. For he knew the sea was alive and listening. The Tidebringer pulsed softly in his hand. It was not a tool, not a prize, not a possession. It was a covenant between sea and sky, between God and world. And as long as it remained in his grasp, balance would endure. The ocean would sing, the tides would breathe, and the promise of Poseidon, the Tidebringer, would remain unbroken. Before maps were inked and compasses were carved, the first mariners sailed by instinct. They looked to the stars and trusted their memory of skies. But the ocean was vast, and memory alone could not hold it. They feared its endless horizon, yet they longed for its promise. Some called it courage, others called it madness. To step onto water with nothing but wood and wind was to gamble with fate. Yet Poseidon watched them, silent and unseen. He did not push them away, nor did he guide them blindly. Instead, he placed songs within the waves, songs that whispered to those who listened. At night, when the sky was clear, Sailors heard rhythms beneath the wind, not the crash of water, but a gentle hum, like a heartbeat. It was Poseidon's gift, the first guidance, a language written in swells and tides, carried in silence. Those who trusted it found themselves drawn toward safety. They followed the current without knowing it was a path. The ocean carried them, not as prey, but as guests. One night, a small boat drifted too far from shore. The men within it prayed, voices trembling with fear. The stars were hidden, and the wind turned restless. But then the sea grew strangely calm. The current shifted, soft yet sure, pulling them west. By dawn, they saw land rising from the mist. They wept, believing it a miracle. It was not chance, but Poseidon's quiet hand. From that day, sailors began to listen more carefully. They pressed their ears to shells and swore they heard voices. They studied ripples, claiming each held a secret. Some even believed the sea had moods. They were right. Poseidon placed lessons within the waves. When the current quickened, it meant urgency. When it slowed, it meant patience. When it swirled, it meant caution. Those who ignored these lessons often found themselves lost, but those who listened always found a way home. Thus, the first mariners became students of the sea. Their journeys were guided not by force, but by respect. Each voyage became a conversation with the ocean, a question asked in wood and sail, an answer returned in tide and breeze, and Poseidon smiled at their humility. For though they never saw him, they honored him. They offered seashells and simple songs before each departure, not as bargains, but as gratitude. And the ocean answered with favor. The bond between mariner and sea deepened. It was no longer man against water. It was man with water. They spoke of the Tidebringer, though they did not know his name. They only knew the sea had a soul. They felt it in the calm that came before storms. They felt it in the sudden burst of wind when sails sagged. They felt it in the whispering hush of waves at night. Poseidon became their unseen companion. He was there in their victories and in their fears. He was the rhythm of their oars, the song in their hearts. And slowly, the ocean ceased to be endless emptiness. It became a living guide, steady and faithful. The first mariners crossed waters wider than dreams. They reached shores thought unreachable. They returned with tales of lands beyond imagination. And always, they credited the sea. They knew they were never truly alone. For within every tide, Poseidon moved. And within every journey, the Tidebringer walked beside them. This was how the first bond was written. Not in ink, not in stone, but in waves. A covenant between mortals and the sea. A covenant sung in foam, carried on currents, remembered in silence. And so the first mariners learned to trust, not only in their strength, but in the ocean's grace, a grace that flowed from the hand of Poseidon, forever unseen, yet forever present. The ocean remembers every voice that has ever called upon it. Among those voices, some shine brighter than others. One such voice belonged to a boy born on a rugged shore. His name was whispered among fishermen as Aelios. From his first breath, the sea lingered close to him. Waves rocked his cradle as though Poseidon himself had touched it. The villagers claimed he was marked by the Tidebringer. They said his laughter calmed storms, his tears stirred tides. Aelios grew listening not to stories, but to the waves themselves. He would sit for hours, ear pressed against conch shells. Others heard emptiness, but he heard patterns like a song. He claimed the sea spoke in voices layered like wind. Most thought it was a child's fantasy. But Poseidon listened, and in silence, he answered.
We must reach the shore!
Each tide seemed to rise when Aelios called. Each gust of wind seemed
storm
to
is
bend
too
toward his
strong.
plea. By the time he reached youth, the sea no longer frightened him. He waded into storms while others fled. He returned always safe, always smiling. The villagers both feared and revered him. Some called him blessed, others whispered he was cursed.
Of the sea.
But Aelios never sought titles. He only sought the truth of the ocean's voice. One evening, under a sky painted in fire, he sat alone. The tide rushed in with unusual strength, and in the rhythm of the waves, he heard clarity. Not whispers, but words. Not confusion, but guidance. The sea called him by name. It told him of journeys yet to come. It told him that Poseidon walked beside him. It told him he would carry the Tidebringer's will. Aelios trembled, not from fear, but from awe. The voice was deep, endless, and kind. It was as if the sea had waited for him to grow. That night, Aelios dreamed of horizons without end. He saw ships sailing farther than any man had dared. He saw islands where rivers gleamed like silver. He saw himself standing among waves taller than mountains. And always, Poseidon was there, unseen yet present. When he awoke, the shore seemed brighter. The gulls circled him, their cries like greetings. The tide left seashells at his feet, arranged in spirals. The villagers gathered, watching in silence. They knew the boy had crossed into something sacred. From then on, Aelios was no longer just a child. He was a bridge between men and sea. Fishermen sought his blessing before voyages. Mothers asked him to whisper calmness into storms. And always, the ocean answered when he spoke. Yet Aelios remained humble. He never claimed power as his own. He said it was Poseidon's grace flowing through him, and Poseidon, watching, allowed it. For Aelios was not chosen by accident. He was born from a lineage tied to tides. His ancestors were among the first mariners who listened. Their covenant with the ocean lived on in him. Aelios was its echo, renewed and bright. As he grew, so too did the strength of his bond. He learned to read the smallest shifts of current. He learned to guide boats by the pull of the moon. He learned to calm winds with nothing but song. The villagers began to call him the listener. But the sea called him something greater. It called him bearer of the tide. For within him, the covenant deepened. And within him, Poseidon saw a spark of destiny. The boy had become more than a voice. He had become a vessel through which the Tidebringer would shape the future. And though Aelios did not yet know it, his path had only begun. The years turned, and Aelios grew into a young man with eyes that mirrored the sea. He carried calm within him, like a harbor untouched by storms. Yet beneath that calm, a tide of destiny waited. The villagers trusted him beyond reason. They believed no voyage failed if Aelios whispered to the waves first. Fishermen offered him the first catch of every season. Children followed him, asking him to teach them the sea's language. And though he smiled, he kept much of it within. For the sea spoke to him in ways no one else could hear. Its voice was too vast, too endless for words alone. One morning, as dawn spread gold across the water, Aelios stood silent. He felt the sea stir in ways unfamiliar. The tide pulled with urgency, like a hand beckoning. And in the hush of the waves, Poseidon's voice rose again. It was not gentle, not like before. It was steady, commanding, certain. Aelios, it said, the horizon calls you beyond these shores. He listened, heart pounding. You are the vessel of the covenant, the sea continued. The bond of mortals and ocean runs through your blood. You will carry the Tidebringer's will into waters unknown. Aelios breathed deeply, tasting salt as if it carried meaning. He did not fear the words. He feared failing them. But Poseidon spoke again, as though knowing his doubt. You are not chosen for strength, but for harmony. You do not command the sea. You walk beside it. And through you, men will learn again to listen. The voice faded, leaving only the hum of waves. But Aelios knew his life had shifted. He was no longer bound to one village, one shore. His path stretched wide as the horizon itself. That night, he sat by the fire, silent as elders spoke. They told stories of mariners who had vanished chasing distant lands. They warned of currents that swallowed ships without mercy. Yet Aelios only listened with quiet understanding, for he knew the sea was no enemy. It was a guide, a companion, a teacher, and Poseidon had called him to follow. Days later, Aelios prepared a small vessel. The villagers gathered, fear and awe mixing in their eyes. Some begged him not to leave, others prayed for his safe return. But Aelios stood calm, hand resting on the boat's wooden frame. This journey is not mine alone, he told them. It belongs to the sea, and to all who sail upon it. I will carry your prayers as I carry my own. At dawn, he pushed the boat into the tide. Waves lifted it gently, as though welcoming him home. The gulls followed, crying out as witnesses.
The storm is too strong.
The villagers stood in silence, watching until the horizon swallowed him. And thus began his first voyage beyond the known. The sea stretched infinite before him, both friend and mystery. Every ripple felt alive, carrying secrets only he could sense. He steered not by stars, but by the pull of currents. He listened for the ocean's voice beneath the wind, and it guided him, soft yet sure, into waters no map had marked. At night, he dreamed of Poseidon's hand resting upon his shoulder. By day, he felt the Tidebringer's presence in every crest and swell. The boy had become a man. The man had become a vessel. And the vessel had set sail on destiny's tide. For Aelios, the horizon was no longer a limit. It was the beginning of a covenant reborn. The sea stretched endless, yet Aelios felt no fear upon it. His boat glided as if the water itself wished him safe passage. Each wave lifted him like a hand carrying a friend. The horizon no longer seemed distant. It was alive, waiting. Days turned to nights, and nights back into days. He learned the rhythm of the ocean, steady and true. It whispered in patterns of current, in the hush of foam. Aelios listened, and he answered not with command, but with trust. When storms threatened, he sang to the waves. The sea calmed, not because of his power, but his harmony. When winds faltered, he let the tide guide him. Always Poseidon was present, unseen yet undeniable. One morning, Aelios awoke to silence upon the water. No gulls, no wind, only a stillness vast and strange. The sea lay flat as glass, reflecting the pale sky. In that stillness, a voice rose deep within him. It was the Tidebringer, speaking not in sound, but in knowing. Aelios, it said, you have crossed the threshold. These waters are not mapped, not remembered by men, but they live in me, and through me in you. Aelios bowed his head, whispering his gratitude. For he felt not burden, but belonging. The still sea began to stir, not with waves, but with light. Beneath his boat, glowing currents danced like rivers of fire. They twisted and braided, guiding him forward. He realized he was sailing upon paths unseen by mortal eyes. Poseidon had unveiled the secret roots of the deep. These were not currents alone, but threads of memory. They carried the weight of journeys long forgotten. Every surge whispered of mariners who had sailed before him. Every glow told of covenants renewed through time. Aelios followed, his heart swelling with reverence. He felt part of something greater than destiny. He was not a master of the sea, but its student, not its conqueror, but its companion. And the sea rewarded him with knowledge. He learned that tides moved not only by moon, but by will. That storms were not chaos, but cleansing. That calm was not emptiness, but promise. Each lesson etched itself within him like a tide upon sand. The voyage carried him to an island unseen by any chart. It rose green and bright from the water, crowned with mist. Birds circled its cliffs, their wings flashing silver. Aelios stepped onto its shore, feeling the pulse of the earth. Here, the ocean's voice grew stronger, more resonant. It filled the air, the trees, the stones themselves. And he knew this place was sacred to Poseidon, a place where sea and land met in covenant. He knelt and pressed his hand to the ground. The earth was warm, as though the tide lived within it. He listened, and the island spoke. Not in words, but in breath, in rhythm. It told him of balance, sea and land, storm and calm, man and tide. It told him he was keeper of that balance. Aelios stayed, learning from the island's silence. He built no fire, took no food without thanks. Every shell, every wave, every stone seemed alive with meaning. At night, he gazed upon the stars reflected in the ocean. And he knew Poseidon watched, steady as the constellations. The island was not destination, but initiation, a threshold through which he must pass. When the time came, the tide lifted his boat again. It carried him from the island gently, like a farewell. And as the horizon opened, he felt the covenant deepen. The boy had become the vessel had become the bearer, and the bearer was now becoming a bridge between mortals and the sea eternal. For Aelios was no longer only a listener. He was the Tidebringer's echo upon the water. The voyage beyond the sacred island tested Aelios in new ways. The sea no longer carried him gently, but challenged his spirit. Currents tangled, winds shifted, and silence turned to mystery. Yet Aelios did not despair, for he remembered the covenant. He whispered to the waves, asking guidance, not mastery. And the sea answered in its own patient rhythm. One dawn he awoke to a strange sound across the water. It was not the wind, nor the familiar call of birds. It was song, faint yet beautiful, rising from the horizon. He followed it, heart steady, trusting the ocean's intent. The sound grew clearer, weaving like silver through the air. Soon he saw figures upon the waves, neither men nor beasts. They shimmered like water itself, fluid yet formed. Their eyes glowed deep blue like the heart of the sea. Aelios watched in awe, for these were not mortals. They were the children of Poseidon, keepers of hidden waters. They circled his vessel, their voices binding wind and tide. One spoke, her words carrying both weight and gentleness. Mortal bearer, you sail upon paths not meant for men. Yet the ocean lifts you, and the Tidebringer walks with you. Aelios bowed his head, speaking with humility. I come not to claim, but to listen and learn. The children of Poseidon gazed at him in silence. Then their song shifted, harmonizing with the sea itself. Waves rose and fell in perfect rhythm with their voices. It was as though the entire ocean breathed with them. They tested him with questions not of words, but of heart. Would he seek to bend the sea to his will? Would he carry its secrets as treasure or as trust? Would he remember that every tide belonged to all? Aelios answered not with speech, but with silence. He placed his hand in the water and let it speak for him. The tide swirled gently around his fingers, carrying his truth. He sought no dominion, only harmony. The children of Poseidon sang louder, the ocean glowing with light. currents braided into patterns never seen by men. They showed him visions within the waves, ancient mariners guided by unseen hands, journeys written in foam across endless seas, a covenant stretching back farther than memory. And in each vision, Poseidon's presence endured. Then the song ceased, leaving only the quiet roll of water. The eldest of the sea children spoke again. You carry the covenant within you, mortal. But know this truth. The Tidebringer is not a crown. It is a weight, a bond, a living promise. Guard it well, for men forget quickly, but the sea remembers. With those words, they sank back into the waves. The water stilled, and silence returned. Yet Aelios felt changed. He had not gained power, but wisdom. He had not claimed the ocean, but earned its trust. Night fell, and stars burned bright upon the dark horizon. Aelios lay upon his vessel, heart filled with reverence. He whispered thanks to Poseidon for guidance unseen yet sure. And he vowed to carry the covenant as more than legacy. He vowed to live it, breathe it, and share it with others. For the sea was not his possession, but his companion. And through him, men might learn again to walk with the tide. Thus, the voyage deepened not into conquest, but communion. And the name Tidebringer began to echo beyond waves, not as a title of power, but as a bond unbroken. A bond that now lived within Aelios, steadfast and eternal. The days that followed carried Aelios into deeper mystery. The sea seemed changed, not wilder, but wiser in its silence. Every crest of foam felt like a whisper, meant only for him. Every ripple beneath the hull seemed alive with ancient memory. Aelios began to sense the world not in sight, but in feeling. He felt the tug of unseen currents like a pulse in the water. He knew when storms would come by the taste of the air. And he knew the difference between the sea's silence and its song. One night, as stars burned bright, he dreamed of a great gate. It was vast, woven of tide and shadow, standing upon the horizon. Voices called from beyond it, low and steady, like waves eternal. He woke with the dawn, and the vision still lingered. The ocean stretched smooth, guiding him toward the dream's edge. For days the sky was clear, yet the air held a weight. It was as though the sea itself prepared for revelation. At last, the horizon shimmered with light, unlike sun or moon. A structure emerged, not of stone but of water woven strong. It rose high like an arch, its form both real and unreal. Aelios' heart quickened, for he knew this was the tide gate. It was the threshold between mortal waters and the eternal deep. Here, no maps held meaning, no compass could guide. Only the covenant within him could carry him forward. He approached slowly, the boat gliding as though lifted by unseen hands. The gate pulsed, alive, glowing with shifting blue and silver. Waves whispered, "Enter, but leave behind what is not true." Aelios closed his eyes and let the tide wash his mind clear. He released fear, for fear had no place here. He released pride, for pride weighed heavier than any anchor. He released doubt, for doubt would scatter him among shadows. Only trust remained, and with it, the covenant. As he drifted forward, the gate opened like a tide drawn back. The sea roared, yet not in rage, but in welcome. Light poured over his vessel, filling it with radiance. And then, silence, deeper than any silence he had known. The world beyond the gate was vast, endless, eternal. Waters glowed with colors unseen, alive with their own breath. Creatures swam, neither fish nor beast, but shapes of memory. They moved like thoughts, shimmering in forms half known. Aelios watched, not with fear but with reverence, for he knew he sailed not only through water, but through truth. Here the ocean's heart beat clearer, stronger, undeniable.
We must reach the shore!
It called to him, not as master, but as companion.
The storm
And in that
is
call,
too strong.
he felt Poseidon's gaze steady and ancient. He was not lost, for he was never alone. Every tide carried him, every current embraced him. The covenant was not only his to hold, but his to live. He realized the tide gate was no barrier. It was a reminder, a question posed to every bearer. Would they carry the bond as burden or as gift? Would they walk with the sea or try to stand above it? Aelios whispered his vow to the waters around him. I will walk with you, tide and storm, calm and depth. I will not command, but I will remember. I will not take, but I will share. The waters swelled, glowing brighter, echoing his words. And for the first time, Aelios felt the sea answer with joy. The tide gate closed behind him, vanishing into light. Yet he knew it would open again for those who were ready. His voyage had not ended. It had only just begun. For now he was not simply a sailor or a bearer. He was the living echo of Poseidon's promise. He was the bridge between mortal shores and eternal tide. And the name Tidebringer lived within him, steady as the sea. The sea beyond the tide gate was unlike any Aelios had known. The waters glowed with soft light, pulsing like a living heart. Every wave carried whispers, not of storms, but of memory. It was as though the ocean itself spoke in endless stories. Aelios drifted forward, his breath steady, his soul open. He felt the covenant deepen with every pull of the tide. Here the sea was not danger or mystery. It was truth revealed. Creatures glided beneath him, shimmering like woven starlight. They moved in silence, yet each left ripples of song behind. Aelios leaned over the vessel, listening, learning in awe. Each ripple carried echoes of mariners long forgotten. He heard laughter, prayers, songs sung upon distant shores. The sea remembered all, and through it, he remembered too. He realized Poseidon's gift was not only power, but memory. The ocean was the keeper of what men forgot, and he, as bearer, was chosen to listen and share. As he sailed deeper, the horizon bent into shifting light. He saw shapes that were not land, but floating halls of water. They rose and fell like palaces woven from tide and foam. Aelios felt drawn, for these were sanctuaries of Poseidon. The boat carried him into one, silent and vast. Columns of liquid crystals shimmered, glowing in the deep. And at the center, a throne of coral and light. It was empty, yet not lifeless. It pulsed with divine presence. Aelios fell to his knees, for he knew this was sacred ground. The voice of the Tidebringer rose, filling the hall. It was deep, steady like the endless pull of tide. Mortal bearer, you have crossed the threshold. You walk not as conqueror, but as listener. You see not treasure, but truth. Thus the sea opens its heart to you. Aelios trembled, yet felt no fear, only reverence. He whispered his gratitude, promising to honor the covenant. The voice swelled, weaving with the rhythm of the sea. Remember, Aelios, the tide is not yours to command. It flows for all, it binds all, it remembers all. You are not its master, but its bridge. With you, men may learn again the language of water. The hall glowed brighter, waves echoing with solemn truth. Aelios rose, his heart filled with clarity. He understood now, the Tidebringer was not about glory. It was about harmony, memory, and belonging. He left the hall, the boat carrying him onward. The waters outside glowed softer, calmer, as if in blessing. Night fell, stars burning above the eternal horizon. Aelios gazed upward, seeing them mirrored perfectly below. He realized the sea was not beneath the sky, it was its twin. Every star had a reflection, every wave a companion. And in that mirrored stillness, he felt Poseidon's gaze again. It was not distant, not lofty, but near, constant, alive. The god of the sea was not only ruler, but guardian. Aelios whispered, "I will remember. I will carry your truth." The tide stirred, answering in gentle rhythm. The covenant lived, stronger than ever before. And as dawn rose, the horizon opened to new waters. His journey was far from over, but his purpose was clear. He was no longer searching for Poseidon, for Poseidon was within the tide, and the tide within him. And through him, the sea's promise would echo forever. The horizon stretched wide as Aelios neared the end of his voyage. The sea lay calm, glowing with the quiet breath of dawn. Every wave seemed to carry a farewell, gentle and kind. He knew his journey was not ending, but transforming. The covenant was not a task, but a life to be lived. The voice of Poseidon lingered in the air, steady and near. It was no longer thunderous, but soft like the tide itself. "You have walked far, Aelios," the sea whispered. "You have listened, you have remembered, you have carried well." He bowed his head, tears bright in his eyes, not of sorrow, but of gratitude for the path he had walked. The boat drifted toward familiar waters, yet nothing was the same, for he was no longer only a boy with questions. He was a bridge, a vessel, a living promise. Villages appeared along the shoreline, small and waiting. Fishermen lifted their eyes, sensing the change upon the tide. They saw not a stranger, but one carried by the ocean itself. Aelios stepped onto the shore, the sand cool beneath his feet. Children gathered, their laughter mingling with the hush of waves. He told no tales of power, no stories of conquest. He spoke of balance, of memory, of harmony with the sea. The people listened, their hearts stirred by the rhythm of his words. They began to see the ocean not as enemy, but as companion. Nets were cast with gratitude, not greed. Songs were sung before voyages, not demands, but blessings. The tide shifted, and the sea answered in kind. Storms grew gentler, calms grew richer, balance was restored. Aelios walked among them not as ruler, but as guide. He carried the covenant quietly, like a lantern in the night. And its light spread, carried from shore to shore. Generations would pass, yet the story endured. The Tidebringer was not a god, not a king, but a keeper. A reminder that the sea is not to be conquered, but cherished. Years later, as Aelios grew old, he still walked by the water. The waves greeted him like an old friend, steady and true. He would sit upon the shore, listening as he once did. And the ocean spoke, carrying the same promise as always. One night, under a sky filled with stars, he closed his eyes. He felt the tide touch his hands one last time. And he knew Poseidon was there, not to end but to embrace. The sea carried him gently, not in death, but in return. For the Tidebringer does not vanish. He becomes part of the tide. Aelios' name lived on, whispered by waves, sung by wind. Children pointed to the horizon, hearing his story in the foam. And whenever fishermen cast their nets with gratitude, he was there. Whenever sailors sang blessings before voyages, he was there. Whenever the tide kissed the shore in quiet promise, he was there. The covenant lived, not bound to one man, but to all. For the sea remembers, and it teaches, and it gives. And in every wave, the echo of Aelios remained. Not as legend, not as myth, but as truth carried forward. The Tidebringer was never about power. It was about belonging. It was about remembering that man and tide are one. And so the story ends, not with silence, but with rhythm. The eternal pulse of the ocean, steady as breath. A reminder that the sea is not apart from us. It is within us, around us, with us always. And as the tide rises and falls, the covenant endures. The sea remembers. The Tidebringer lives.